For most people, pirates are a fantasy, a romantic image of freedom on the open sea, treasure maps, skull and crossbones flags, Captain Jack Sparrow. But the real story of pirates is something completely different. It's a story about power, poverty, and rebellion. About ordinary men who looked at the world's most brutal economic system and decided to burn it down. It's a story about governments that secretly hired pirates to do their dirty work and then hanged them when they were no longer useful. It's a story about a brief, extraordinary moment in history when a group of outlaws created something that looked almost like democracy, 100 years before America did. And it's a story that isn't over, because right now, in the 21st century, pirates are back, and they're more dangerous than ever. This is the real history of pirates. Let's get into it. Before we get to the Golden Age of Pirates, the skull and crossbones, the Caribbean, rum and plunder, it's worth understanding that piracy is not a modern invention. Piracy is as old as sailing itself. The earliest recorded pirates in history were the Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of seafaring raiders who terrorised the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC, attacking Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and virtually every coastal civilization of the ancient world. Their origin is still debated by historians, but their impact was devastating. Some scholars believe the Sea Peoples were partly responsible for the Bronze Age collapse, one of the most catastrophic civilizational failures in ancient history. In ancient Greece, piracy was so common that it was barely considered shameful. The historian Thucydides wrote that early Greek communities were asked, as a matter of routine hospitality, whether they were traders or pirates, with no particular judgment implied by either answer. It was simply a profession. Julius Caesar himself was captured by pirates in 75 BC while sailing the Aegean Sea. The pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar, then a young, relatively unknown Roman nobleman, reportedly laughed and told them they were undervaluing him, and insisted they demand 50. He also reportedly told his captors, in a jovial tone, that once he was free, he would return and crucify every one of them. The pirates thought he was joking. He wasn't. After his ransom was paid and he was released, Caesar immediately raised a fleet, hunted down the same pirates, and had them all crucified. But in a gesture of mercy, had their throats cut first so they wouldn't suffer. That story tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between power and piracy throughout history. When most people think of early medieval pirates, they think of Vikings. And the Vikings were, depending entirely on which end of their axe you were standing, either the most terrifying pirates in history or the most sophisticated seafaring traders and explorers of their age. The answer, of course, is that they were both simultaneously. The Viking Age began dramatically on June 8, 793 AD, when Norse raiders attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England. They killed monks, threw others into the sea, looted the gold and silver treasures of the church, and disappeared back into the North Sea as quickly as they had come. The attack sent shockwaves through Christian Europe. The idea that holy places were no longer safe from the sea was genuinely terrifying. Over the next 300 years, Vikings raided coastal settlements from Ireland to Constantinople, from the tip of North Africa to the rivers of Russia. They sacked Paris. They settled Iceland, Greenland, and reached North America, nearly 500 years before Columbus. But calling Vikings simply pirates misses something important. The same people who raided Lindisfarne also established trading networks that connected the Arctic to Byzantium. The same warrior culture that produced terrifying raiders also produced extraordinary navigators, poets, and legal thinkers. The line between raider and trader was often the same person, depending on whether the people they encountered were weaker or stronger than them. A Viking meeting a defenseless monastery was a pirate. The same Viking meeting a well-armed trading post was a merchant. This ambiguity between piracy and commerce between theft and trade runs through the entire history of seafaring, and it becomes the defining theme of the Golden Age of Piracy. Here is one of the most important concepts in pirate history, and one that most people have never heard of: a privateer. A privateer was, essentially, a pirate who worked for a government. They were given a document called a letter of marque, an official license from a king or queen that authorised them to attack and plunder the ships of enemy nations. Keep most of the loot, give a percentage to the crown, and don't attack our ships. Simple. For governments in the 16th and 17th centuries, privateers were an extraordinarily cost-effective military tool. Why build and maintain a navy when you could just authorise private citizens to do your sea warfare for you? The most famous privateer in history was Sir Francis Drake, known to the English as a hero and national treasure, and known to the Spanish as El Draque, the dragon, the most feared pirate on the seas. Drake circumnavigated the globe between 1577 and 1580, plundering Spanish ships and ports the entire way. He returned to England with so much Spanish treasure that his ship, the Golden Hind, was riding dangerously low in the water. Queen Elizabeth I personally knighted him on the deck of his ship. The Spanish were furious. They demanded Elizabeth condemn Drake as a pirate and return their gold. Elizabeth smiled, pocketed her share of the plunder, and refused. The same man was simultaneously a knighted hero and a wanted pirate, depending entirely on which country you asked. This was the fundamental hypocrisy at the heart of the Age of Sail. Every major European power used pirates when it was convenient. And when it was no longer convenient, when peace treaties were signed, or when the pirates became too powerful and started attacking everyone, governments simply reclassified their privateers as criminals and hanged them. The only difference between a privateer and a pirate was a piece of paper, and the piece of paper could be revoked at any time. The period between approximately 1680 and 1730 is known as the Golden Age of Piracy, and it produced the pirates that virtually every movie, novel, and legend is based on. To understand why it happened, you need to understand the context. The late 17th century saw European powers, particularly England, Spain, France, and the Netherlands, engaged in almost constant warfare. They licensed enormous numbers of privateers to attack each other's shipping. When peace finally came with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, thousands of experienced, armed, and ruthless sailors suddenly found themselves unemployed. They had no legal way to make a living. The merchant navy paid starvation wages. The Royal Navy was brutal, flogging, disease, and death. And they had just spent years learning that attacking ships at sea was profitable, relatively easy, and exciting. So many of them became pirates, and they converged on one place, Nassau in the Bahamas, a lawless, uncontrolled harbour that became the pirate capital of the world. At its peak, Nassau was home to over 1,000 pirates, a floating republic of thieves, outlaws, and former soldiers who created their own society completely outside the law. And what's extraordinary about that society is how different it was from the world they came from. Here is the fact about Golden Age pirates that genuinely surprises most people. Pirate ships were, in many ways, more democratic than any nation on Earth at the time. On a typical Royal Navy warship or merchant vessel, the captain had absolute power. He could flog, execute, or work sailors to death. Sailors had no rights, no say in decisions, and no share of profits. The class system of European society was reproduced perfectly at sea. Officers lived in comfort below deck. Common sailors lived and died in misery. Pirate ships did something radical. They wrote articles, essentially a constitution for each ship, that every crew member signed before joining. These articles typically included: every man had an equal vote on major decisions. The captain was elected and could be voted out. Loot was divided according to a fixed formula, with every man receiving a share. Injured pirates received compensation, extra shares for losing a limb or an eye in battle. Disputes were settled by a crew vote, not by the captain's judgment. Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates in history, capturing over 400 ships, had articles that included the right to a candle for reading after 8 p.m, a ban on gambling to prevent disputes, and guaranteed compensation of 800 pieces of eight for losing a right arm. On some pirate ships, enslaved Africans who escaped and joined the crew were given full shares, equal rights, at a time when slavery was the foundation of the entire Atlantic economy. This wasn't paradise. Pirates were violent, brutal, and ruthless in their raids. But within the ship, they had built something genuinely extraordinary. A society based on consent, shared risk, and democratic governance that the rest of the world wouldn't catch up to for another century. Some historians have argued that the pirate ship was the most egalitarian institution in the 18th century Atlantic world. Think about that for a moment. The Golden Age produced some of the most extraordinary characters in history. People so dramatic they seem like fiction. But they were real. Blackbeard, born Edward Teach, or possibly Thatch, was the most feared pirate of his age. He cultivated his terrifying appearance deliberately, weaving slow-burning fuses into his enormous black beard, so that in battle his head appeared wreathed in smoke and fire. He rarely actually killed anyone. He understood that reputation was his most powerful weapon. A merchant ship that believed Blackbeard was coming was far more likely to surrender without a fight than one that wasn't afraid. He operated primarily along the American colonial coast and in the Caribbean, at one point blockading the entire port of Charleston, South Carolina, and holding the city hostage for medicine. Eventually, the governor of Virginia sent forces to hunt him down. In the final battle in November 1718, Blackbeard reportedly sustained 5 bullet wounds and 20 sword cuts before finally dying. His head was cut off and hung from the bowsprit of his enemy's ship. Calico Jack, John Rackham, was known for 2 things. First, he designed what became the most iconic pirate flag in history, the skull with 2 crossed swords. Second, he had 2 of the most remarkable pirates in history on his crew, both of them women. Anne Bonny and Mary Read are 2 of the most extraordinary figures of the entire era. Both disguised themselves as men to sail and fight. Both were reportedly among the most ferocious fighters on Calico Jack's crew. When the ship was captured by British authorities in 1720, the male crew members were found drunk below deck. Bonny and Read were the only ones who continued fighting on deck. When Calico Jack was sentenced to hang, Anne Bonny's reported last words to him were devastating in their contempt. She told him that if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog. She was later pardoned, reportedly because she was pregnant. What happened to her after that, history doesn't record. The Golden Age of Piracy ended the same way it began, through government policy. By the 1710s, the pirates of Nassau had become too powerful and too disruptive to Atlantic trade. The merchants of London and the colonial governments of America were losing enormous amounts of money. Something had to be done. In 1717, King George I issued a royal proclamation offering a full pardon to any pirate who surrendered before a specific deadline. Many accepted, including the famous Black Sam Bellamy's former associate, Benjamin Hornigold. In 1718, a former privateer named Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau as the new royal governor of the Bahamas with a simple brief: clean up the pirates. He came with warships, soldiers, and pardons. Those who accepted the pardon were freed. Those who refused were hunted down and hanged. Rogers' motto, which became the motto of the Bahamas, was Expulsis Piratis, Restituta commercia. Pirates expelled, commerce restored. It worked with brutal efficiency. Within a decade, the Golden Age was essentially over. The most famous pirates were dead or scattered. Nassau was transformed from a pirate republic into a respectable British colony. The men who had built democratic societies at sea, who had created systems of equal rights and shared governance that their home countries wouldn't adopt for generations, were hunted, hanged, and erased from official history. What remained was the legend. And the legend, as we know, proved impossible to kill. The story of piracy isn't just a Caribbean story, it's a global one. While the Golden Age was unfolding in the Atlantic, the most powerful pirate in history was operating on the other side of the world. Zheng Yi Sao, also known as Qing Shi, was a former sex worker from Canton who married a powerful Chinese pirate lord, and when he died in 1807, took command of his entire fleet. She built it into the largest pirate organization in history, commanding over 1,800 vessels and 80,000 sailors at her peak. She created a sophisticated pirate code, strict rules of conduct, governance, and profit sharing. She defeated every fleet the Chinese, Portuguese, and British sent against her. She was never beaten in battle. Eventually, when the Chinese government realized they simply couldn't defeat her militarily, they negotiated a peace deal, on her terms. She retired at around age 35, wealthy and free, and lived to the age of 69, an extraordinary outcome for any pirate in history. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Barbary pirates of North Africa were raiding European coastlines so effectively that between 1530 and 1780, they captured an estimated 1 million Europeans as slaves, reversing the usual historical narrative of African slavery in a way that most Western history books completely ignore. The United States' first foreign military engagement, the First Barbary War of 1801, was fought specifically against these pirates. The US Marine hymn's opening line, "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli," is a direct reference to this war. American piracy history is literally written into the national anthem of its military. And now we come to the part of the story that most people don't realize is still happening. Piracy never ended. It just changed locations. In the late 2000s, Somali pirates became a global crisis. Operating from the failed state of Somalia, where there was no functioning government, no navy, and no law, fishermen turned pirates began attacking commercial shipping in the Gulf of Aden, one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. At their peak between 2008 and 2011, Somali pirates were conducting hundreds of attacks per year, seizing massive cargo ships, oil tankers, and even a Ukrainian vessel carrying tanks and heavy weapons. They held crews hostage for months, extracting ransoms of millions of dollars per ship. The international community eventually responded with massive naval patrols. Ships from over 30 nations, including the US, China, Russia, and the EU, all operating together in the same waters for the first time in history. The Somali piracy crisis revealed something uncomfortable about the modern world. The pirates weren't madmen or ideological extremists. They were desperate men from a country where foreign fishing fleets had destroyed local fisheries, where decades of civil war had eliminated any economic alternative, and where a single successful piracy operation could pay more than a lifetime of legitimate work. Sound familiar? The same economic desperation that drove 18th century sailors to piracy was driving 21st century Somalis to the same desperate choice. Today, piracy has shifted again, to the Gulf of Guinea off West Africa, to the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia, and to Venezuelan waters in the Caribbean. Global maritime piracy incidents number in the hundreds every year. The skull and crossbones has been replaced by speedboats and AK-47s. But the fundamental story hasn't changed at all. Pirates have been with us for as long as humans have sailed. They've been raiders and traders, terrorists and freedom fighters, criminals and Democrats, villains and folk heroes. The romantic image of the pirate, the freedom, the adventure, the refusal to bow to any authority, has always resonated because it touches something real. The desire to live outside a system that feels rigged, to take back what was taken, to be accountable to no one but your crew. But the real story of pirates is also a story about what happens at the extreme edges of human society. When governments fail, when economic systems crush people to nothing, and when desperate human beings find that the only option left is to take what they need by force. Every era of piracy in history has been a symptom of something broken in the world above it. And as long as that brokenness exists, the pirates will always come back. If this video made you see the skull and crossbones differently, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What should we uncover next on Facts and Stories? See you in the next one.